Hello, welcome to this edition of Yesterdays. You know, once in a while in a career and in a lifetime, you meet a person who really touches you and whose passion and commitment to ideas and to principles really stands out and has an impact on community. Today, I have the privilege of having as my guest Frances Young, who I've known for many years and who has lived in Scottsdale for 40 years. And over that period of time, has had such a strong commitment to social justice and such a strong commitment to helping people and has made such a difference that I thought it would be great value to this community to hear your thoughts, to have a little conversation with you, and to talk about Frances Young and your experience here in Scottsdale. So I'm going to turn to Frances and ask you if you'd tell us, 40 years is a long time in Scottsdale's 50-year history, to tell us a little bit about you, how you came to this commitment to social issues, and get us started from the roots of Frances Young.
Well, I was born and reared. Of course, when I was growing up, we called it raised in Texas. And if you lived in Texas, I was born in 1921, and if you went through the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s in that part of the country, they were very prejudiced towards anyone that wasn't from Europe, Caucasian. Very, very prejudiced. And I remember my mother was a staunch Democrat, and she really campaigned for Al Smith, 19 and 29. And mothers had told me, I remember my mother telling us, she said, "I do not know why I'm wasting all this time because he'll never be elected because he's a Catholic." And that's when I realized in our part of the country, the heartland, if you were a Catholic, a Negro, or a Jew, you were way down at the bottom of the totem pole. So I think that was the beginning of realizing that all people are the same, but some need to help with leveling the playing field. It was because of the prejudice that I grew up with. However, I will say this, I'd always thought that if I ever lived someplace where there were more Catholics than Protestants, it would be different.
Probably the other way around then, huh?
Yes. Then when I went into the Navy in 1942 and lived in Washington, D.C. in a predominant Catholic neighborhood, they were very prejudiced towards the Presbyterian. So I realized that it was whoever had the power.
Sure,
you know.
Sure. So it grew out of the lack of tolerance you saw, whatever the situation was.
That's right. In Jacksboro, Texas, there was a young black boy that was from a tree, hung from a tree. And he had not done what they said that he did, and no one cared. You know, these are the things that you see growing up. And I grew up when the Ku Klux Klan definitely was on the march. Mm-hmm. And they belonged to certain Protestant religions there. And it was a bad time for our country, is what I'm saying, with the Ku Klux Klan, and it was tolerated.
Well, out of that, with you, grew a set of principles that went way beyond the circumstances that were so prevalent in the country in those days into, my words, not yours, but into just a deep passion for social justice. And you brought that to Scottsdale. And tell us a little bit about those early days in Scottsdale for you.
I belonged to St. Daniel's Catholic Church, and when Jack was hired and came here with Motorola.
Now, Jack is
my husband. That is deceased. He died in '89.
Okay.
From smoking too much. And we started the Mass at Motorola. We called it St. Motorola's. And after the church was built and Father Kelly became pastor, because the original pastor died, Father Lawrence, that he started a social justice committee. And it had a lot to do because of the minorities that belonged to our church. They originally belonged to Our Lady with Father McGuire, and then they became part of St. Daniel's. And the Yaqui Indian that lived in the marsh, and this is before we had the Green Belt was established, they wanted to approach the city for housing and then wanted the school district for education.
Now, where was this geographically? This is around Roosevelt.
It's between, it was off of McDowell Road on 77th Street, and you know, came there and turned off of McDowell. There used to be a bar that sat there, and there was open fields at this time, but Motorola was very small, and Motorola put in crops and harvested all that land. and it was between McDowell and Roosevelt. But Roosevelt then was not a paved street. And then there was a big canal that came through there too. Okay. And we had been, it had been county, and then the city took it in from the county. When the homes were built, they were sewage, but the people that sat in the bars, the Yaqui Indians, were still on septic tanks. And it was Bill Donaldson was city manager then. And they had started their neighborhood council. The residents of Vista, the Yucky Indians, had a neighborhood council. And their goal was housing and education. And their objective for housing was to be able to get some money to upgrade their housing and get on, become part of the city through the sewage. And then they wanted everyone to learn to speak the English language, so when their students started to school that they were speaking English instead of Yaqui and Spanish. They came to St. Daniel's Social Services Committee. And Dr. Keno Martinez was chairperson at the time, and he was professor of languages at ASU. And I was secretary and treasurer of the social justice. And they approached us with help, asking for help and assistance. And you know, they had already established their goals, and they wanted help. And through social justice, we started helping the Yaqui Indian. And they approached the parish council for a community center, which we had located a trailer, and for $1,500 for a community center.
It's not bad, is it?
No, it's not bad. No, it was 3-bedroom. Oh yes, it was very good. And this is how it all got started. Plus,
where was that trailer? Was it on the site where Vista is now, or is it?
No. It was closer to McDowell when you turned off of McDowell, and it was a lot that Gabe Martinez, that works for the city, by the way.
Sure.
He donated the lot to put the trailer there, and then it became a community center. And from that trailer is how the neighborhood center really was born. And it's because of the Yaqui Indian and their objectives and goals. Working. And Bill Donaldson, really, when he came down and they had invited me to a potluck, never left, you know, that he sat down before he left. I think he was leaving for Cleveland, Ohio, and told us how to go about.
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati? Okay. Ohio. Okay. Told us what to do about approaching the city, and really let us know it was going to be a very difficult job. It wasn't going to be easy.
Which is just what you were ready for, right? So that's the seed, and through the social justice committee at your church, you got more and more active, and obviously got drawn into it in a big way. Tell us then how Vista came about, because that's sort of the natural evolution of this, isn't it?
Well, in the process of putting the trailer there, there was a committee. God, I remember, what STEP, was it called, STEP Committee?
Scottsdale Town Enrichment Program.
Okay, STEP.
There were two sets of those, one in the 60s and one in the 70s.
And this committee were the ones that had recommended this green belt. Now keep in mind, we had been approaching certain people within the city. At the time, all you had in the way of the city was a park, that old park downtown. You know where that's located? The original park, downtown park, where they had the swimming pool?
Oh, sure. Right. In fact, just so people who, we give them a little geography here, it's right about where, south of the library,
yes,
where the old police building is, now the Justice Center. And there was a swimming pool and a park and basketball.
And everything.
Yeah.
That was it. And the person that was over the park system then was LB Skacewater. Where were we?
We were trying to leap to where.
Oh, the Vista.
Because Vista del Camino is such a core of the southern part of the community's sense of place.
When the Greenbelt, the Yaquis had been approaching certain people within the city, not the council so much as just certain people within the city to get things done.
Right.
And when the Greenbelt was going to come through, God, I hate to say this, but really the city, where are we? The city had ignored the Yaquis until all at once they needed that land. And with this green belt coming through, they knew they were going to have to be relocated. The Yaqui Indians were going to be relocated. And so they came up with housing, and also because of the trailer being there, it's a community center. In the process of the trailer there, the neighborhood council had commissioned Maricopa County to become a community action program. They had been using the people from Victory Acres and Guadalupe, their community action program. And the city helped us become a community action program. Dave Harris and certain people in the city helped us, and Lorraine Frank, and petitioned, and we became a community action program. And the county then paid a coordinator to sit in the trailer, and they paid 2 grassroots people from Vista, where they were trained, and Adina Flores was one, and Dora Contreras, where they were trained to work with the community. And then the city put in for federal money to build a neighborhood center, along with money from the city too. I think at the same time, it was the same thing as when you relocated the people from the area where the Performing Arts Center is.
Right.
Yes.
Right, okay.
So that's how it came about. Now then, the city really thought, where it came to the neighborhood center, is that they had an advisory board. The majority, the voting people on their board were Yaqui Indians, and then there was an advisory board. There was Lorraine Franks from the city, Molly Valencia Frescas from the city, Ray Rady from school district, Yavapai, and myself, and Severin Barstead from the Methodist Mission Commission, Los Arcos Methodist Church, because churches worked with St. Daniel's to get all this done. It was really a communal deal to get these things done.
So that's the birth of Vista del Camino.
Yes.
And tell us then, what are the issues that you focused on? Because you've always lived in that area.
Yes, I live in the Hohokam area, yeah.
And tell us some of the issues then that drew you to community involvement in a deeper and deeper way. And I want to make sure too that we leave ourselves time to talk about things that were recognitions and validations of this 40 years of work, like the 12 Who Care Award, which is very prestigious, and an award named in your honor, which is given out every year to someone who commits to the same values. But tell us then, Vista's open, there's still issues, you're concerned about people getting a fair shake?
Well, leveling the playing field. When the trailer opened up, we worked very closely with Yavapai and Coronado High School. That's where the students attended school. And there was a lot of absentees. So we had gone over and talked to Don Manning at the time, that was principal at Yavapai, and I've forgotten who the principal was at Coronado. God, I should remember, kids were going there. Anyway, the principal at Coronado, I think it was Kid. And we said, if you will call the trailer, because the Community Action Program paid a secretary and the liaison people and the coordinator, if you'll call us the students that are absent from this area, and we gave them a list of all the students from Yavapai and Coronado, we more or less became truant officers. And we would knock on doors, and I found out after the 3rd morning you knocked on that door, honey, that mother had that kid up and he was in school, or she was in school. And we approached Lillian Shaheen. Is that how you say her name?
Lillian Shaheen.
She was head of youth services with Scottsdale Police. And we needed some volunteer people to help us become more or less truant officers. And so she assigned people Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday that would go around and knock on the doors, and became quite successful, where then they asked us to go out in the dominant community, the kids that were not going to school. And this was all volunteer through the city and the police department at the time. Then it was probably 67, is that, I think it was Bob Hendricks was principal at the time. Yeah, it was principal. And he called me, and we sat down, and we had a 64% dropout of Yaqui Indians from high school. They would leave Yavapai very well prepared, being Coronado High School. And usually by the 1st semester of their sophomore year, they dropped out. And we found out it was because that's when you bought your books. You had to purchase your books. And we then raised money. The women, the mothers, and the fathers started selling tamales and things, raising money. And then we also had, you know where you sell used clothes and things, what do you call that?
Rummage sale.
Rummage sales. To raise money to buy school books. And the first year of all the kids we had in high school, our book bill and tuition fees was $2,200. Well, we were short money. And that's when school started the Tuesday after Labor Day. And I had gone down and signed for all these books.
So you were on the hook, huh?
Oh, well, honey, Jack was on the hook. I wasn't working, you know. I thought, oh, God, he's going to kill me.
Yeah, then, okay.
Well, show you how good we were. I only needed $1,500. And I thought, my God, what am I going to do? I had talked to Father Kelly, and he was trying to help, you know, and he said, well, I didn't realize. And I said, well, it takes a lot of money to buy books and fees and keep kids in school. And this was just books and fees at Coronado High School for the students. And went over to Smitty's on a Friday, was buying groceries, and the controller was there. This is when they had their offices upstairs over Smitty's that's down at McDowell and Granite Reef. Mm-hmm. And I was telling Bobby, and I said, you know, Bobby, I said, I've been praying and nothing's happened. You know, I've got to have this money, this $1,500. And he said, well, Francis, he said, Clyde Smith and Sweetest brother just got back from Las Vegas and they won money gambling. He said, why don't you go up there and tell him your sad story? So I went upstairs and told Clyde, you know, what had happened. And he said, well, tell you what, are they still making tamales? And I said, yes. And he said, well, go get me 3 dozen tamales. So I called Jack, and we went to Louise and Gabe, and I got 3 dozen tamales, and I got a check for $1,500 from Clyde Smith.
That's great.
So this is when I realized, dear, if you have a mouth and use it and let people know, and Clyde and Eddie Basher were always extremely, extremely good to every.
Well, maybe it's if you've got a mouth and you use it and you have a good cause.
Maybe that's it.
It all goes together. Well, then again, let's jump forward just to maybe about the time we started to expand the operation of Vista.
Well, when the center was built, I think the city fathers, and I'm not talking about the council, I'm talking about some of the staff people, really thought that it would become a community action program like they have in Tempe. I think they at the Escalante Center is community action, and but the neighborhood council, the voting ones, which were the Yuckies, they voted that it was time that they had started the brokerage system, and it was time for the city to take over. And Dave was really surprised. He said, Francis, he said, I thought that the county would have gone in there.
Sure.
And the best judgment that was ever made is by the Yuckies saying no, that we want it to be a city facility.
And that whole brokerage system that grew out of that has been a tremendous success.
Absolutely.
Some things come and go,
yes,
but it always
it's there. It's stable. It's there.
You know, we've got a relatively short time in this interview. I want to make sure we get at some of the issues that I know, because you've called me more times
yes.
than I can think of over the years. Some of the issues you see today, born out of that history and that passion, that commitment, and the observations of your youth. What are the things now that fill your mind and your areas of concern about social justice that we see?
Well,
are we making progress?
Oh yes, definitely. Definitely we've made progress, but we still have a long way to go, but that's the human.
We've got Paiute now, which you've been.
Well, no, it's one. Oh yes, very muchly so, and the area around Paiute is entirely different than the area where the Yuckies live, because they were in their homes, they were stable, they were here. The area of the underserved people, the Holiday Park area, a lot of the non-English speaking people there are transit in and out. Mm-hmm. But that center was built to help those people, and it's for the whole community. And when Vista was built, everybody said it's for the Yaqui, and we said no, because I realized soon after the trailer was there, the third week, and County Health was coming out, and a couple of other agencies, Angie Lopez called me, and she was manning the telephones there, because she was, I think, a junior at Coronado High School, and she was out of school that afternoon. She called me, and she said, Mrs. Young, she said, there's a couple of Anglo people here that need help. And I said, well, Angie, you have an executive board, call them. I said, you're in charge of that center, the Yuckies, and talk to them. And so she called me back and she said, well, they said fine. Well, that's when I realized there were other people
Sure.
that needed services. It wasn't just the Yaqui Indians. And that was opened up the same way with the school books. You found out when you started this revolving book fund that all the ones counselors was calling people need books, and the Yaqui said, fine, as long as the books are here, it was revolving. They're more than, in other words, we're all going to share.
And you have received some very nice recognitions for the work you've done.
It's very humbling, yes, I have.
And one of the ones that stands out to me, and again, there are so many, I was at one very recently that you received, is the 12 Who Care, which is with Channel 12. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, I was never so shocked in my life as when they called me, and Herb Drinkwater turned my name in. And it was fairly new. I think it was fairly new at the time, 86, I think, 86, that they called and told me that I had, they were going to come and interview me down at Vista. And I said, for what? And they said, well, the 12 Who Care. And then they told me what it was about, and they came down, and it was a very, very, it was an honor, which I never thought. You don't expect things like that.
Well, you don't, and I wanted to mention it because I think that you talk about your experience and your passion for justice in very direct and simple ways, and produce results, and you keep producing results, and it's this cumulative.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you what I have found out over the years working with and against the city. You know, it's a double sword issue. Is that when I received the word at the time, my husband had just became ill, and he did not attend. And at the end, I had said that I realize that many times your convictions are luxuries. And I could afford the luxuries of my convictions because Jack Young gave me 3 good meals a day and a warm bed to sleep in at night. And if we had not had staff with the city helping us every step of the way, we could not have accomplished this. And many times they told us and helped us, and we couldn't dare use their names. And that's when I realized that standing up for what you believe is right is a luxury, because it's beans and jeans. The city staff knew that with certain council people, if it became known that they were assisting with certain things, they could either be demoted or not have a job. Am I making sense to you?
Sure, you're making sense.
Okay.
That was, of course, a long time ago. We're dealing with history, but yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's the point that I think maybe sums up so much of this, is that as you have these needs in these areas that you address, you form alliances with people, and you never do it alone. Nobody does it alone.
Never. And we had city staff, and at the time you have to realize that when Jack and I moved here, it was population about 15,100 people. And it was very upper, and they had so many millionaires and this whole bit. And they didn't ever want to recognize that they had people in need here. Rightly or wrongly, that's the way that it was. And it took, I finally told one of the council people, I said, look, if we could make poverty sophisticated, we would, but we can't. But we always had some good city staff working with us. Well, it's very important to realize the city, and I've never quite known if it's by accident or on purpose you hire such good people.
Well, I think that there's no question about that there's good people. And
yes.
Maybe they're drawn to the city because of people like you. Tell us, what is it that you see as our challenges as this community continues to grow from your perspective? I mean, the areas that you see.
And I don't know when it happened, this North-South division, and it seems to be there. Someone's asked me, said, oh, you live in fact, there was a lady who brought some things to my house, and she said, I always thought you lived in the Arcadia area. And I thought, well, God, I don't look that prosperous, you know. And I said, no. I said, I've lived here for a long time. And she said, well, when did this division happen? I said, I don't know. I said, it never bothered me for somebody to say, do you live in South Scottsdale? That never concerned me. But she said, well, you realize that they're putting a division. And I had never really thought of it until this person, very well known, made this statement. She said, I hate to see this happen. And I do not, and I think that it seems like it's going where the people look at the North like the haves and the South as have-nots, and I don't look at it like that at all. But it's there, and I think this is the main thing that we're going to have to deal with, Dick.
Well, and within that, Frances, do you see that division? Because that's been talked about for years, and to some degree it's borne out, but in other ways it's not. This community still flows very nicely in a whole lot of ways.
All the time.
But the what do you see in terms of the types of issues with regard to the Yaqui Indians, the Hispanic community, the minority populations? I see a significant growth.
No, very much so. Oh no, we have grown, and when I say grown, and I mean, and the reason that things have happened, and I've got to give the city credit again, and honest God, you think that I'm running for office, that the city has helped.
Oh, sure, and I also...
And also the school system, you know, we're all in it together. And
what do you see for the future of Vista?
It's
continues
going
to grow and expand.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's an element that we've talked about it years before in this program, that people would be surprised at how much business Vista gets and how many people there are
in
our community. It's a complex community.
Absolutely.
So these issues you wrestled with don't go away.
And we've been very fortunate. We've had extremely competent coordinators at Vista from the get-go. And let's say again, I don't know if it's on purpose or, you know, just a fluke, but you've had very good coordinators. And they have recognized the needs in the community. And the reason that we have raised money to help the people in the community is to make sure they don't become homeless. Many times when people have illnesses, and most working people are 3 paychecks becoming destitute, that if you can help them over the hump and keep them in their homes, and that's what Vista's all about, to make sure that they stay in their homes, can pay their rent and their utilities until they can get back on their feet. And because of the way that the Vista is set up, that the people recognize that when they help people, a lot of the people that have been helped come back and give to concerned citizens. So it's I one time made the statement, if you're going to need help, you should live in Scottsdale.
Now, that's a very strong statement about the community's willingness to help, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. This is the place to be.
Well, you've made a tremendous difference, Frances. And you've
no, honey, we all have.
Well, and you've stayed the course. It takes a steady hand focused in a direction. If you had, in just a short time here, in this program, if you had a message for people about getting involved in paying attention to some of these issues, what would it be?
I think many times people are afraid from someone that doesn't look like them or act like they do, and we're all the same underneath. That, you know, the human spirit is very strong, and most volunteers, once you get involved in this type of human services, it almost becomes a religion to you. Very muchly so.
Becomes a part of you and you become a part of it.
Absolutely. We have been fortunate that in Scottsdale there are people that do get involved and they do stay the course. I know when they had asked Herb Drinkwater when they were looking to give me this 12 Who Care, and they said, evidently Mrs. Young has a lot of patience. He said, oh, no, she doesn't have patience, but she does preserve, you know, hang in there. Persevere.
Persistence and perseverance.
Yes, and it's believing in what is right. One time within an education, there was a teacher at Coronado High School, and I was in helping this student level the playing field, and this teacher said, well, what do we want to do, give the student a day? And I said, no. All I want is what this student has earned. And for you to look at this student as another student instead of someone with brown skin and dark hair. That's all I'm asking for.
And that's probably a very fitting point to end our conversation. Time flies by when we talk like this. And to thank you, Frances, both for what you've done, because I think you give us a picture of 40 years ago, some circumstances of Scottsdale that are addressed and we faced, but that never quite go away. It's just part of life. And your consistent attention to those has really made a tremendous difference. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for being here with us. you.